Hello guys, today we're going to be doing a video on Horizon Zero Dawn with a variety of GPUs. But we're going to be starting it off with the GTX 750 Ti and the Ryzen 3700X. And the rest of the specs will be down in the description as well. Alright, let's jump into the settings. We're going to be starting it off with 720p on the lowest setting. Now I'm not sure what says VRAM is 4 gigs. This is a 2 GB card. Man, this does not look good. Wow, this looks pretty bad. But we're getting 40 FPS, so I guess it's running decently well. But this looks far worse than 720p. I tried 720p and that just didn't look good at all. So increased it to 900p and it's actually running pretty well still. Still running at above 30 FPS, which is the most we can expect for this card. And honestly feels pretty great. It doesn't feel too bad with the mouse either. It obviously has input delay a little bit, but with the controllers, this will definitely feel a lot better. Now we'll try to find the best settings for each card and the best resolutions. I'll try to explore a 30 FPS range and a 60 FPS range for each card if it's possible. But for the 750 Ti, it's obviously going to be very tough. Honestly, not that bad right now. We haven't fallen below 30 yet. Maybe for like a split second into the low 20. This game can look really good at max settings, but on the lowest setting it just looks really pixelated. Maybe we can what we could do is we could actually one more setting that we can try out for this card is go ahead and play at 1080p and enable FSR. Okay, let's go ahead and see how this looks. Now this just looks blurry, that's the problem. Yeah, this is not the way to go. And our frame rate is actually not much better either. Got an average FPS of 34, max FPS of 51, and a minimum FPS of 23. Now this must have been for like a split second because I didn't actually see the FPS drop down to 23. So it's probably a very rare occasion where this will dip this hard. But for the most part it was sitting in the 30s very consistently. And yeah, running at 900p, low settings. The game looks pretty decent honestly at 900p. Alright, let's jump into the 1050 Ti. Alright, we're back with the 1050 Ti now and we're aiming for 1080p, 30 FPS slash 60 FPS. Probably have two presets for that. Low and maybe medium, maybe high even, who knows. Okay, let's apply that and then let's jump back into it. All right, let's continue. And let me know if you like this type of video more than like the normal style. For new games that are going to be released, I will stick with the old method of doing a video for each card, but for these games that are already been out for a while, I think putting them all in one video will probably be much better. Getting 45 FPS average with the 1050 Ti. Now we're already pretty close. Maybe we've got to dip down to 900p to get a 60 FPS experience. But honestly, for this type of game, I don't think you really need to play at 60 to have a good experience. You can probably get away with 45 or even 50, because the mouse movement feels way better at 45 than it does at 30. You pretty much, in this game anyway, you don't really feel any input lag when you turn the mouse. Trying to aim. It's a bit clunky, but it still feels alright at 45. There's no lagging or stuttering at all either. It just looks too blurry. You let me know if you like this look, but for me, it's just too blurry. You lose too much of your resolution. But we are very close to 60 FPS now. We're even hitting it at times. This is what we're running with. It's a mix between medium and high, but mostly high. And the game looks 10 times better already at playing at high settings compared to low settings. And frame rate obviously has dipped into the 30s, but this is our 30 FPS experience, the console-like experience, running super well. So I think if you want to get a consistent 60 without the need of FSR, you're gonna have to drop it down to 900p and yes, and drop this down to the lowest. We'll just keep FSR on. Clouds, you can't go lower than medium. And we're sitting at 50 FPS, 57, 52. So it's between 50 to 57 FPS, but mostly we're sticking to like the mid 50. So it's very close to 60. And this avoids all the blurring that you get with FSR at 1080p. Obviously it's not super sharp, but I think this looks better than FSR quality at 1080p, in this game anyway. This is VSync on, but the screen is set to 120 Hz, so it can definitely push above 60 FPS, just for you guys, just so you guys know. Look at that, 120 FPS. But yeah, average FPS is 58, max FPS of 107, and minimum FPS of 32, so we never fell below 30. Alright, we're back with the GTX 1060 now, and we're getting 50 FPS. The high preset. I didn't touch any of the settings. Got it with the 1050 Ti. This is just how it came. And we're getting 50 FPS. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if we dip that into the 40s, but 50 FPS, there's no lag at all. There's no... the game feels very fluid, that's what I should say. I think texture quality is a big one for sure. I want to put it down medium. Apply. And we're still shy of 60 FPS. Wow, this is harder than I expected. I thought we could easily hit 60 FPS with this. Hard at 1080p. But I guess high settings might be a bit too much. Okay, medium settings then. This is as close as we're gonna get, okay? We're running at pretty much 58, 57 FPS now. We are... It's basically a medium preset, more than anything. Let's see if we can actually bring the texture quality up again. How much is that gonna impact our performance? We lost like 3 FPS, I think, from just 3 to 4 FPS from playing at medium textures versus the high textures. But we don't really need to hit 60. Just getting close enough to it is good enough, I think. Now, can we play it at just max settings? Let's see. We're going to play at ultimate quality. Everything's maxed out. Motion blur, we're going to disable it. And we're going to be playing at 40 FPS. And yeah, we are. Now, ultimate quality definitely does look better in some aspects, and in others it looks identical to high / medium. The frame rate is definitely taking a hit. 10 to 20 FPS hit. We're consistently sitting at 40 FPS, even dipping down into the 30s at times as well. It was an option if you like how it looks, but I think high and medium are the way to go for this guy. We're got an average FPS of 56, max FPS of 105, and a minimum FPS of 36. Honestly looks pretty good. This was the 1080p with the high preset. Jumping into it with the 3050 now. Gonna start it off with 1080p since that's what the majority of people are gonna be playing this with. And gonna be running the game at the high preset. I think will be pretty much the sweet spot. Should be able to get 60 FPS. This is more powerful than a normal 1060. So hopefully we can get 60 FPS. Should be able to. There it is, 60 FPS. At high settings. Oh, 70 FPS play more fair. 60 FPS was our low end. 70 FPS, super sharp, super smooth. Looks great. It's playing great as well. We don't really need to have DLSS enabled. And as we saw with the 1060, the Ultra preset doesn't really give us too much anyway. We have some headroom as well to increase it to ultra settings if you really want to, but I wouldn't recommend it since you lose too much for what you get. Now, since we're here, I'm going to go ahead and test out some 1440p gaming as well. Let's give us a good excuse to use DLSS. So let's go ahead and push it up to 1440p. Okay, 1440p looks so sharp. Oh, okay. Gonna keep it at high settings. I don't think it can handle high settings. We're gonna easily fall below 60, obviously. Probably gonna get 40 FPS. This looks much better though. Looks so much sharper than 1080p. These graphics look insane. And 45 FPS is honestly pretty great still for this title. It doesn't feel laggy at all. Mouse movement feels great. If I didn't have the FPS counter on, I wouldn't really care about the performance of this game. It's very enjoyable. Now, we can go ahead and enable DLSS just to see what performance headroom will give us. Gonna give it to quality settings. The graphics look very good still. Maybe it's not as sharp in the distance, but I wouldn't call it blurring. It's not like it doesn't have a blur effect to it. It just looks like it looks very natural. And we're getting 60 FPS now. 1440p high settings.
Be fascinating.
This looks crazy good. If you've got a 1440p screen, I would definitely recommend you play at 1440p high with DLSS than to run it at 1080p native. I wouldn't be surprised if we dip down into the mid 50s with this, but still.
It's your sister, Alara!
I'd rather play at 55 FPS than to play 1080p 60. And just for the fun of it, I'm going to go ahead and bring DLSS down to balanced, just because. The graphics still look very good. I don't think I can still tell a difference between the two. Oh, I can definitely see now with the smoke. That smoke looks really bad with DLSS. Like when you move the mouse, it takes a second for it to adjust, but it becomes normal again. But other than that, looks very good. We got an average FPS of 74, max FPS of 135, and a minimum FPS of 43. And we ran the game at 1080p at the high preset. Gonna go ahead and jump into the settings. We're gonna max the game out fully, no motion blur, and everything else will keep default. And we're still pulling 100 FPS. Obviously, we're gonna be dipping into the 90s. We can't hold a consistent 100 FPS. But this card is a beast at 1080p, so we'll have no problem at all running a game like this at 1080p. At 1440p and 4K, we probably, at 4K we definitely have to use DLSS, but at 1440p we can probably get away with max settings at 60 FPS. I did see us dip down into the low 90s for a bit, but I don't really feel any of those FPS drops at all when you're playing. But I'm not sure if we can hold a consistent 60. Oh, of course we can. Holding 70 FPS. Max settings 1440p. This card kills 1440p gaming and 1080p gaming. This card can easily last for above 6 years at 1080p and maybe like 4 or 5 years at 1440p without DLSS. Right now we're getting pretty much stuck at 70 FPS, but we can easily dip down into the 60s for sure. Alright, let's go ahead and risk it and push it up to 4K. I'm a bit worried since our VRAM is pretty close to its limit, sitting at 7 gigs, and we only have 8 available to us. So it's a bit worrying, but we might be able to get away with it. At 4K, you pretty much need to use DLSS for this card. Some games you can still play at 4K on the lower end settings, but there's really no reason to not use DLSS at 4K. It looks identical to native. There's no downsides to it except, you know, you get free frames. So I'm gonna go ahead and enable DLSS, set it to quality, but we can obviously also get away with playing at balance or performance even. There we go, quality DLSS. Let me know if you can tell a difference between no DLSS and DLSS, because I really can't tell. And we're pretty much locked at 60 FPS. We do get some dips into the 50s, but it's like a 4 FPS dip, so nothing too major at all. Came back and we got an average FPS of 102, max FPS of 178, and a minimum FPS of 46. 1080p at ultimate quality, everything maxed out, and we actually ran into a CPU bottleneck. In certain spots, the CPU was struggling and the GPU was sitting at 88%, was the lowest that I saw it, so just something to keep in mind. If you got a more powerful CPU, this wouldn't be an issue. And either way, even if you get the bottleneck, we're still sitting at 100 FPS, so nothing to worry about. Jumping back into it, we're running an RTX 3080 now, and the game's running at max quality. I'm gonna do 1080p just because, and do 1440p and 4K. Shouldn't have any issues with this card at all, I would hope. But guess we'll see. Let's jump into it. Jumping into it with 1080p max settings. You can see that we're pushing 115 FPS. No CPU bottleneck. Wow, CPU is actually sitting at 40%. I didn't really pay attention too much to the CPU usage of the other cards. It was a mistake, but we'll go back and take a look at the CPU towards the end of the video. Same with the RAM as well. But getting 120 FPS, 1080p max settings. I think with the 3060 Ti, we were sitting at 90 to 100 FPS. So Getting around 20 to 30 FPS, just depending. We had some dips into the 80s as well at times. Oh, we're getting some stutters here. We had some dips into the 80s as well at times, but that was like super rare. It didn't happen too often. But we're holding a consistent like 115, 120 FPS here, 1080p. But with a 3080, you want to ideally be running at 1440p. Same with the 3060 Ti. Obviously, that kind of makes sense if you want to get like the most amount of FPS when playing at 1080p. But your main focus is like story-driven games where the mostly single player. Definitely want to take a look at 1440p or even 4K screens, because I think this card can easily handle those resolutions. And we fell into the 90s, even the 80s at times as well. 96, close enough to 100 I guess, sitting at 99. And we had some stutters when we actually loaded up the game, which was, I think, might be a one-off thing. But we lost about 20 FPS, 20 to 30 FPS, sitting at 100 FPS. And with the 3060 Ti, we were sitting at 70 FPS here, 60 to 70 FPS here. So again, a 30 to 40 FPS increase between the two cards, which doesn't really mean anything in the experience of the game. Both cards feel identical. 70 FPS versus 100 FPS, they both feel identical in this type of game. So you're not seeing like any benefits with playing at higher frame rates. This is the part where I was looking forward to the most. Seeing if we can actually handle 4K max settings with a 3080. Should be able to. Oh yeah, we can definitely play at 4K max settings, 65 FPS. We obviously have DLSS available to us as well, but you don't really need it unless you actually feel your FPS crashing super hard into the 40s or something, which shouldn't happen. Seems like a 60 FPS, consistent 60 FPS experience. And we can obviously go ahead and drop the settings down as well into either high or medium. So I'm going to go ahead and try that out as well. Play at high settings just to see what FPS gains we get. And get around 5 to 6 FPS in this situation. And the game still looks fantastic as well. It looks incredible how good it looks. Alright, we won't spend too much time with this anymore. Let's go ahead and jump into... I'm going to jump back to the 3060 Ti and the 3700X. And we're going to test out the CPU and the RAM usage just to see what is the perfect amount. By running the memory test, we're running 32 gigs of RAM like we did for the entirety of the video, except for the 3080 system that had 64 gigs. That's why I was using up 17 gigabytes of RAM. And we're using up 10 gigs of RAM right now, 10.4 gigs. I'm trying to go ahead and push the settings back up to what we had before. And looks like we're getting 85 to 90 FPS. Just something, this is our control test I guess, so this is what we're going to be looking for when we actually drop the RAM usage, drop our total memory down to 16 gigs and 8 gigs. Alright, 16 gigs of RAM. FPS seems to be the same. RAM usage is sitting at 9.5 instead of 10.7 now, which makes sense because the system's using some of it. And the game's running the same, no stutters, no lagging at all. FPS is actually higher than 32 gigabytes actually for some reason, but that just could be the one-off thing, you never know. Alright, 8 gigs of RAM, frame rate again, the exact same, but the game does feel more stuttery and more jumpy. Sometimes, it's not like always, it's very rare, but it's happened twice now where when I pan the camera the game freezes for a split second and it resumes like normal. But other than that, the frame rate, the actual performance is the same, you just get some stutters here and there. Just something to keep in mind though in other games, when you have too low of system memory, some things just won't load properly, like buildings or something like that, but I just haven't seen it here yet. I'm gonna do a voiceover for the CPU portion since it would take too long. Running with all cores enabled, it was running at like 130 to 140 FPS at 1080p low settings with the 3060 Ti, and limiting it to 2 cores and 4 threads, we drop down to 80 FPS, so we lose like 60 FPS by doing so, and then actually enabling 4 cores and no extra threads, we gain an additional 20 FPS from just having the 2 extra threads. Jumping up to 6 cores, we gain an extra 20 to 30 FPS on top of that again. So we're running at 110 to 130 FPS. but the 30 part is kind of rare. Normally it's sitting at like 115 to 120. And then enabling all 8 cores, we jump up to the FPS that we had before, which is like 130 to 140. But yeah, that's it for the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. If you did, give it a like, and a subscription would highly appreciate it. See you next time.